Well, Kaustubh, thank you for that welcome and introduction and for the invitation to join you today. And I got that message loud and clear and already reduced my slide deck in accordance with your request so we can take some questions at the end. I think that's the most interesting part, is to take the questions. So it's my role now just to give you a quick, very high level introduction to the roadmap process. You've heard a little bit about it already. You've seen the right-hand side of this slide, which is the climate ambition statement. And within that, there is the commitment to develop a roadmap. And in the context of the roadmap, it's those 4 points on the left-hand side that are the most important that we have to build on. The target of carbon neutral concrete by 2050, that the roadmap is across the built environment value chain. It takes into account circular economy and the whole life. So let's see what that looks like. On this slide, you can see the circular economy for our product, and the color key. You're probably already ahead of me and reading on the right-hand side. The blue on this slide, those are the parts that the industry is responsible for and can act on. And we have control of the levers and the carbon reduction there. The green are where our product is used, and therefore we don't necessarily control that. Not many of our members are involved in the design and the construction using our material. So we would like to influence practices there, but we cannot control them. And we've already heard from Claude a lot about carbonation or recarbonation, and that occurs at different parts around this circle. Now, not only would we like to influence practices, and we've heard about enhanced carbonation already, but we'd also like to influence accounting practices. And you've heard a lot about that from Claude just now. All of the things on this slide are part of our roadmap process. As alluded to by Claude at the end of her presentation, there's lots of other benefits that our material brings. And in terms of the quantification of our roadmap, they'll be out of scope of our roadmap. So on the text at the bottom of this slide, an example would be the use of concrete foundations for wind turbine towers. Clearly a benefit in terms of carbon and for society, but something that will be out of scope numerically for our roadmap, but in scope in terms of our qualitative messaging. If I just move on to the next slide, our target is clearly to 2050 in carbon neutral concrete, but that's a long time away. Well, 30 years, in some respects, not long, but for our stakeholders, we need to communicate information prior to that. So we will have a commitment to 2030. Now, the actual numerical target, that is yet to be established. The process of establishing that is part of doing this exercise now, in looking at the metrics, looking at the technologies, looking at the policy levers that are required to implement these technologies and to reduce carbon. That decision will be made in the context of what's already out there in terms of ambition scenarios. We heard from Magali earlier about science-based targets, and there are trajectories from the IEA as well. And so the decision, the to be determined in the middle of this slide, will be contingent on what society more broadly and industry more broadly is already doing, and the technologies that we have at our disposal. So let's look at the roadmap in a little bit more detail, what stage we've got to. So to date, we've considered all the stages of the cement and concrete life cycle, and you can see some detailed slides at the bottom. We've now created a detailed model, and that's now been further developed by ECRA, who've been involved in a series of roadmaps in the past, both globally and at regional level. And we've just commenced, and Kaustubh is helping us with this, and many people on the call. We've just commenced in 9 different regions around the world to look at in more detail what the baseline is with data and how to forecast for 2030 and for 2050 the impact of various technological levers and policy instruments will be. In the following slides, well, I've actually reduced some of these slides down. I'm just going to give you a quick flavor, quick example diagrammatically of what is in the detailed model. So as a concept, the model on the left-hand side picks up all the contributing factors that impact on direct emissions. So we're very familiar, and we've heard today a lot about the direct emissions from the cement kiln. Down the left-hand side, you can see the different things that will impact ultimately what those direct CO2 emissions are. Now, clinker production, the actual what's happening in the kiln, clearly has a direct linkage, but so do all the other things on the left as well. What is it that we do during our concrete production? One of the questions I've seen in the chat box is about how moving from bag cement to ready mix. And the industrialization of concrete production is a key lever in reducing direct emissions because it will reduce demand ultimately on clinker and therefore the direct emissions that will be created. On the right-hand side, there are other carbon emissions, reductions, carbon sinks, which we'll need to take into account as well. Now, for each of these, you can imagine there's quite a lot of detail, quite a lot of data to collect. And I'm just going to pull up one example, which is at the clinker cement and the secondary cementitious material end. Now, on this slide, there's various bits of information which certainly the cement manufacturers in the room will be very familiar with. And we have that baseline data. And the roadmap process is about forecasting, estimating, aspiring to what the changes might be as we go forward. So the energy efficiency, the fuel mix, perhaps using different raw materials or additional raw materials into the kiln, which may be already decarbonated, which will impact on the process emissions. On the right-hand side, you'll see that these detailed bits of information from this life cycle stage will be outputted into an overall model. Emission factor on the right, how much carbon capture there might be, the electrical energy efficiency, and at the bottom the material substitution. And whether that be at the cement manufacturing or at the concrete production stage, that all needs to be accounted for in a manner that doesn't duplicate, doesn't double count, nor omits any extended materials that might be used, and output that into the model. It's more complicated. I'm not expecting you to read the detail of this slide, but perhaps the 5 boxes on the right you'll be able to read. Another important life cycle stage, and Lord Adair Turner made reference to this, the fact that things can happen at the design and construction stage, things that can happen that up till now perhaps haven't, because our product is relatively cheap, dare I say, cost effective. It's a cost effective construction material, very cost effective, and therefore there have been other drivers in the mind of the designer and the contractor. They may be considering speed of construction. They may be considering the other factors in terms of architecture. But as sustainability becomes more of a criteria, as carbon becomes more of a driver, we will see different design and construction choices being made that will drive carbon down. And that will enable concrete construction of buildings and infrastructure to be delivered with the same functionality, but with lower carbon. And I've just pulled out some examples on the right-hand side that you've probably read. Our roadmap will not only be per ton of product, but it will also be absolute emissions. We've heard from Claude about her work in establishing that absolute emissions from our sector are approximately 7% of total emissions. We need to contribute through this roadmap information that will be able to feed in forecasting what that percentage might be as we go forward to 2030 and 2050. And part of that is understanding what societal demand will be for construction as we go forward. Now, just one little indicator there is from the IEA. They published a report in September 2020 called the ETP report. And that gives some detailed information. It's interesting, one of the things that they've got in that report, they are suggesting in that report that lifetime extensions of assets, of concrete assets, no change in specification, no change in design, but just ensuring that the concrete assets we have their life used for longer rather than premature obsolescence. That choice can reduce overall demand of our product by 10% is what they suggest. So one of the things in our regional groups, that work that's just commencing now, will be to assess those sorts of levers and how appropriate, how applicable we think they are in each region. So that's a question for all of you to consider. In India, do we think that concrete assets will be able to have their life extended? Not through any change of design or specification, but just through the way society uses those assets. And with that, I'll leave it, and hopefully I've left some time for questions, Kaustubh, and I've helped us get our program back on time. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for sharing the glimpses of the roadmap. I just have one question, which you just touch upon, is how do you plan to incorporate the Indian cement sector in GCCA's roadmap 2050?
Brilliant, Kaustubh. I love that question because Kaustubh himself is setting up a group to draw on the expertise that you have across the whole life cycle stage to ensure that we can get the more precise information from India to feed in to the roadmap. India, obviously, a key part of our global roadmap, and we really look forward to working with Kaustubh and the team that he's created to do that. So thank you, Kaustubh, and thank you for inviting me today.